If you've ever tried to quit something, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or pornography, and found yourself relapsing the moment you had access to it, you are not alone. For people who struggle with impulse control, addiction isn't just hard to break, it feels almost impossible. Here's the truth: moderation doesn't work when you can't control your impulses. And if temptation is just a few steps or clicks away, relapse will always win. But today, I'm going to talk about how you can beat addiction. I'm going to share some practical strategies, some philosophical insights, and why cutting off access to your addiction will be the most important step you can take. So, why is breaking addiction so much harder when you struggle with impulse control? Well, addiction hijacks your brain's reward system. When you take drugs or alcohol or consume porn, your brain floods with dopamine. That's why you keep going back for more. It's like your brain learns to crave that quick hit of pleasure even if it's ruining your life. But for people with poor impulse control, there's an extra challenge. Your brain has a harder time resisting immediate gratification. Moderation doesn't work because every little taste of that thing you're addicted to sets off a cycle of cravings. The moment you have access to it, you lose the fight. If you relate to this, it's not because you're weak, it's because your brain is wired to prioritize short-term pleasure over long-term goals, and breaking this cycle takes strategy and intention. Philosophers have been wrestling with this problem for centuries. Plato compared the human soul to a chariot being pulled by two horses. One horse represents our rational mind, and the other represents our appetites and desires. If you let that horse of desire run wild, it drags you wherever it wants. Sound familiar? And then there's Aristotle. He believed that self-control is like a muscle. The more you practice it, the stronger it gets. But if you struggle with impulse control, you may need to start smaller, with things you can manage, and build up your strength over time. And let's not forget about the Stoics, who taught us that true freedom comes from controlling your desires and not being controlled by them. A lot easier said than done though, right? But here's where these philosophies can give us hope. They remind us that self-control isn't about being perfect. It's about creating systems and habits that keep you on track. So let's talk about solutions. Everything I'm about to say is completely obvious. However, there's still so many people struggling with addiction who refuse to acknowledge it or put it into action. The number one rule for breaking addiction when you have poor impulse control is simple: cut off access. If you can't resist it, don't let it near you. For drugs and alcohol, you need to stop buying it, and you need to stop putting yourself in situations with triggers for your addiction. Stop going out into social settings where your addiction will be. If you're around it and other people are doing it, you're very likely going to relapse. One of the hardest parts of breaking drug or alcohol addiction is if your friends partake in it. If you hang around them and they're doing it, you're definitely going to do it too. You can't be around people who will cause you to relapse. And yes, it sucks you have to lose friends because of it sometimes. But if the people around you are causing you to relapse, arguably they're not very good friends. It doesn't necessarily mean they're bad people, but their habits carry over to you and are destructive to your life. For porn, you can install content blockers or delete apps, but I know most of you won't do that. So you just need to decide that you are going to change and that you want to change. There isn't anyone else who can pull you out of it. It is your responsibility. You first need to acknowledge it, then look at it and determine the positives and negatives, and I guarantee you the negatives greatly outweigh the positives. What are the positives of it? You get a short burst of dopamine that you could still get just masturbating without porn. And what are the negatives? You feel like complete shit afterwards, you feel completely guilty and regretful most of the time, and it completely warps your brain on how you perceive relationships and yourself. And breaking addiction isn't just about stopping the bad habit, it's about replacing it with something healthier. Whether it's exercise, art, reading, find activities that give you a sense of accomplishment and release those feel-good chemicals naturally. Yes, it may not occur as often, but when you experience that version of dopamine, it will be real and something you won't feel shitty or guilty about afterwards. And lastly, don't think about quitting forever. Just focus on winning today. Every day you resist is a victory, and those small wins will build momentum over time. If you can do one day, why can't you do two? If you can do two, why can't you do three? And by the time you're a couple weeks into it, you won't even be thinking about it anymore. Here's the truth. Breaking addiction when you have poor impulse control is going to be extremely hard. It's going to take a lot of work, discipline, and a complete willingness to change your environment, but you can do it. Remember Plato's chariot. You are the charioteer, and every time you take back control from that horse of desires, you are steering your life back in the right direction. In conclusion, Cut off access, replace bad habits, and focus on the small wins. If you start today, you're already on your way to a better tomorrow.